June 6, 1944, is one of the most pivotal dates in world history, the day the Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. It was a brutal assault, marked by massive casualties and an intense battle for survival. But what's lesser known is how this monumental operation succeeded largely due to one of the greatest deceptions ever pulled off in military history. On that fateful day, Adolf Hitler believed he was facing a diversion, not the real invasion. Why? Because he had fallen for one of the most elaborate lies ever told in wartime. The story of a phantom army led by none other than General George S. Patton. The impossibility of invasion. By 1944, the Allies had a seemingly insurmountable task ahead of them. Nazi Germany had turned Western Europe into an impenetrable fortress. The Atlantic Wall, a vast series of coastal defenses stretching over 1,600 miles, was lined with millions of mines, anti-tank traps, concrete bunkers, and artillery nests. The goal was clear: to push back the Germans and bring an end to their occupation of Europe, but breaking through that wall would be no easy feat. The Dieppe raid in 1942, a failed Allied attempt to invade Nazi-held France, proved just how dangerous storming fortified coastlines could be. Of the 6,000 soldiers who took part, mostly Canadian, almost 60% were either killed, wounded, or captured. German guns rained down from high cliffs, tearing apart the beachheads before they could even gain a foothold. The raid made it painfully clear: the cost of a full-scale invasion could be catastrophic. But as the Allies planned for D-Day, the stakes were even higher. Military planners feared that the initial assault could cost upwards of 100,000 casualties in the opening hours alone if the Germans were prepared. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, even prepared a note taking full responsibility in case the invasion failed. That note sat in his pocket as the assault began, a grim reminder of just how uncertain the mission was. The German defenses were formidable. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, responsible for the Atlantic Wall, made the stakes crystal clear. The first 24 hours of the invasion will be decisive. For the Allies and for Germany, it will be the longest day. A necessary deception. Complete surprise was impossible. The Germans were already aware of the Allied buildup in Britain, having tracked the movement of troops, ships, and aircraft. What remained uncertain was the exact location of the attack. The Allies knew they couldn't hide the invasion, but they could mislead Hitler about its location. To succeed, the Allies needed a deception plan, one that would convince the Germans to focus their attention on the wrong target, giving the true invasion force a fighting chance. The closest point to England, Calais, was the obvious choice for the Germans. The Allies needed to make it appear as if that was the real target, even though Normandy, a few hundred miles away, was where the invasion would take place. Building the illusion, the British intelligence team hatched a bold plan: create an entire phantom army designed to mislead the Germans into believing that Calais was the primary target. The plan was codenamed Operation Fortitude, and its centerpiece was General George S. Patton. Patton's name alone struck fear into the hearts of the Germans. His aggressive tactics, rapid armored campaigns in Sicily, and reputation as a bold and unpredictable leader made him the perfect figurehead for this deception. The Germans feared Patton more than any other American general. He had earned the nickname America's most aggressive general, and was even compared to Hannibal by Nazi military analysts. His name was synonymous with a fierce, relentless drive. The Germans expected him to lead the real invasion into France, so the Allies planned to make them think he was leading an invasion force at Calais. Patton had already made a significant impact on the Germans' strategic thinking. They believed that he was not only a formidable general, but also a wild card who could break through any German defense. The Allies capitalized on this by assigning Patton to lead the fictional 1st U.S. Army Group, FUSAG, a force that existed only on paper but was intended to make the Germans think that a major assault was about to hit Calais. The creation of FUSAG was a masterpiece of military deception. The army was to be made up of inflatable tanks, rubber trucks, and fake landing craft that would be strategically placed in southeastern England, close to Calais. But even the most convincing props would only go so far. To make this illusion truly believable, the Allies needed to create a full-fledged false narrative around Patton's Phantom Army. In early 1944, the Allies set to work building a massive fake army in southern England. Over 2,300 inflatable vehicles, tanks, and artillery pieces were constructed. These props, made of rubber and canvas, were designed to look just like real military equipment when viewed from the air. They were carefully placed in formations that mimicked real U.S. military layouts. Fake camps, supply depots, and command posts were set up to give the illusion of a full military buildup. But the deception didn't stop there. The Allies also created a network of fake radio transmissions that mimicked the real movements of an army. These false reports, sent out over Allied radio frequencies, were meant to be intercepted by German intelligence. Every detail, every fake troop movement, supply request, and even fake complaints was designed to build a consistent narrative. The Allies even employed double agents, men and women who had infiltrated the German intelligence network to feed the Germans false information about the buildup at Calais. The goal was to keep the Germans focused on Calais for as long as possible, ensuring that the real invasion at Normandy would have a fighting chance. The man behind the illusion. To make this deception even more convincing, the Allies needed someone with an undeniable reputation, someone who could easily capture the Germans' attention. And there was no better choice than General Patton. The Allies knew that by placing Patton at the center of this fictitious army, they could ensure that Hitler would be completely fooled. In January 1944, Patton was briefed on the plan. While he was frustrated by the idea of commanding an army that didn't exist, he took to the role with his usual commitment. He made public appearances, visiting the fake camps, and even staged high-profile inspections of the supposed Fusag forces. His every move was meticulously planned to make the Germans believe that he was preparing to strike at Calais. With Patton's name attached to the Phantom Army, the deception was almost complete. Now, the Allies only had to ensure that the German intelligence apparatus would believe what they were seeing. The deception surrounding the Phantom Army was only successful because of its depth and layers. It wasn't enough to create fake tanks and rubber trucks. The Allies needed a network of lies that spanned the entire battlefield. To this end, British intelligence worked meticulously, ensuring that every element of the deception was synchronized. The most visible aspect of the deception was the creation of fake military installations and equipment. Over 2,300 inflatable tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces were constructed. These props were placed in carefully planned formations, mimicking the real U.S. military's strategic deployments. However, creating these physical elements was only the start of the plan. Behind the scenes, the Allies worked to create an entire false narrative that would convince Hitler and his military leaders that an invasion at Calais was imminent. Radio operators, using the same codes and protocols as real military messages, began sending false reports of troop movements, supplies, and logistics. These messages were intercepted by German intelligence, which was constantly monitoring Allied communications. Every fake order, every false complaint about equipment or personnel was designed to reinforce the idea that a massive army was building up in southeastern England, ready to strike across the English Channel. The power of deception through radio chatter. The creation of fake radio transmissions was one of the most critical aspects of the deception. Operation Sky, which was the code name for the radio deception arm, ensured that the Germans received a constant stream of fabricated intelligence. The radio chatter mirrored the buildup of a real army, reinforcing the idea that Fusag was preparing to strike at Calais. The messages escalated over time, becoming more frequent and detailed, further convincing German analysts that a major attack was about to happen. These transmissions included everything from false troop movements to fake supply requests, all timed perfectly with the movement of the fake equipment and the presence of General Patton. The Germans, relying heavily on intercepted communications, began to believe that a massive force was amassing on their doorstep. The deception was so convincing that even with some of the physical evidence looking too perfect, the Germans were willing to believe what they heard on the radios. The role of double agents. To fully cement the illusion, the Allies enlisted a group of double agents, spies who had already infiltrated the German intelligence network and were feeding information directly back to the Nazis. By 1944, British intelligence had turned every German agent operating in the United Kingdom into a double agent, all working against the Nazis. These agents were part of the double cross system, run by the 20 Committee, which coordinated their efforts to spread false information to German intelligence. The most famous of these agents was Juan Pujol Garcia, known as Garbo. Garcia was a Spanish businessman with no formal espionage training, but he proved to be one of the most successful double agents in history. He created an entire network of imaginary agents, each with detailed backstories, personalities, and fake intelligence reports. He managed to convince the Germans that he had a vast network of spies operating in the UK. The Germans were so impressed with his efforts that they awarded him the Iron Cross, even though he was working against them. Garcia's agents reported on everything from troop movements to fake equipment stockpiles, all aligned with the fake buildup of FUSAG. His reports were detailed and convincing, making the Germans believe that the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Another key agent, Roman Czerniawski, also played a significant role. A former Polish officer who had been captured by the Gestapo and then turned over to the Allies, Czerniawski provided the Germans with fake military intelligence, helping to sell the idea that Calais was the primary target. The double agents' work was coordinated with the fake radio chatter and the false physical evidence, creating an illusion so convincing that the Germans were willing to believe it. They reinforced each other's stories, building a web of lies that was nearly impossible for the Nazis to unravel. Patton, the face of the deception. While the physical deception and the work of the double agents were critical, the key to making this all work was General George S. Patton. The Germans' fear of Patton made him the perfect figurehead for the deception. His reputation as an aggressive and unpredictable leader meant that anything he was involved in would attract the Germans' attention. The Allies knew that by making Patton the face of the Phantom Army, they could ensure that the Germans would focus all their resources on Calais. Patton's role was simple: be seen, be loud, and let the Germans draw their own conclusions. He made high-profile visits to the fake camps in southeastern England, inspecting the rubber tanks and inflatable vehicles that were part of FUSAG. Patton's appearances, timed perfectly to coincide with German intelligence operations, sent the message that he was preparing to lead a major assault on Calais. In January 1944, Patton was briefed on his new role as the commander of FUSAG. Although he was frustrated by the idea of commanding an army that didn't exist, he played his part to perfection. He visited fake military sites, made public statements about Calais being the invasion target, and posed for photographs that were then sent to German intelligence. His every move was meticulously planned to ensure that the Germans believed he was leading the real invasion force. The decisive moment, D-Day. The deception reached its climax on June 6, 1944, when the Allies launched the Normandy invasion. While the Germans had seen the buildup of forces in England, they were still convinced that the main invasion would come at Calais. The Phantom Army, under Patton's command, had done its job, fooling the German High Command into believing that the real attack would occur at Calais. As the real invasion began on the beaches of Normandy, the Germans hesitated. Hitler, still asleep and sedated by sleeping pills, was unaware of the invasion as it unfolded. By the time he woke up, the Allies had already established a foothold on the beaches. Meanwhile, German forces were still stationed near Calais, waiting for an invasion that never came. This delay allowed the Allies to gain crucial time to establish defensive positions and bring in reinforcements. The impact of the deception Operation Fortitude was an extraordinary success, not just because it fooled Hitler, but because it delayed the German response at a critical moment. The German High Command, convinced that Calais was the target, kept nearly 15 divisions, including elite panzer units, locked in place for weeks. These divisions never moved, and as a result, the Allies were able to secure Normandy and move inland without facing the full force of the German military.